Hello, hello, and welcome to this short, hopefully short, little video. I want to respond to a question that came up in the private Facebook group for Anatomy of a Premise Line, which you can check out in the description below. There's a link to that page. And if you have taken Anatomy of a Premise Line classes or have read Anatomy of a Premise Line book, you can join that private group. Where we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff related to AOPL. But one of the folks in class, David, I hope I pronounced your name right, from Italy, asked a really, really interesting question that I think a lot of people may not consciously think of, but may run into as they're developing their stories. And I just wanted to show it to you real quick and read it because it's a great, great question. So usually the hero's journey means the protagonist undergoes a transformation from negative to positive, meaning what we always talk about in class, which is having a moral component or a moral problem or flaw, and then growing and changing in a positive way at the end of the story, the classic kind of structure. Overcoming the flaw or deficit in order to become to better gear up for the story's resolution. Exactly. Okay, we all know that setup. But what happens when the opposite is true? Meaning this transformation is the protagonist recognizing that having a positive trait or quality makes him or her ill-suited for the story's challenges. A friend suggested Michael Corleone is a good example of this. Okay, we're going to talk about the Godfather for sure. Okay, so in other words, can you have a story where the character is basically good or is positive in how they're being portrayed in the story, and because they're good, they just fall apart. They're just so, that goodness is just trampled, and they end up in the terrible, terrible position and die or are defeated, or maybe they do win at the end, but it's a bittersweet ending. The point being, the dynamic isn't the classic, I'm all screwed up and have to heal, but it's, I'm a pretty nice person and I get really screwed up at the end. So it's kind of the opposite kind of a thing. Well, yeah, you can do that. You can do anything you want. It's your story. You know, there are kind of rules with this stuff, but more there's best practices. One of the best practices is having a flawed character and having them grow at the end, because it shows change. And the nature of a story, as I define it in Anatomy of a Premise Line, is a human being on a journey of change where they are different at the end than they were at the beginning, and it says something about the human condition. You can have that with a character that is troubled in the beginning and is even more troubled at the end. You're making a statement about the human condition, and there's no rule that says the character, the protagonist, has to win in the end or be a good person in the end. They could be worse, like Michael Corleone. But the point being, if you have a character who starts off good, what's motivating them other than the story setup? In other words, you've got them facing a problem, a predicament, an issue, and they're basically a good person, or what's called in some circles the steadfast character. It's the basically good person caught in the no-win scenario. Okay, scenario. These are popular structures. People write these all the time. I call them situations. They're not stories because there's no moral component. They're not fighting a moral battle with themselves about how to be moral in the world. They're trying to solve a problem. They're trying to solve a puzzle. Their motivation is very plot focused, not geared towards some internal dynamic that is going on. Let me switch to a different picture here. Okay, so You can do this, but I would challenge you to think that this is not a story. This is what I call a situation. Not bad, not wrong, but not a story, because there's no moral motivation. There's no moral forward momentum where they develop, change, grow, and teach ourselves and themselves what it means to be human. They just get into a predicament or a problem or a puzzle, have to solve it, and they either get out alive at the end or they don't. Again, not bad and wrong, but it's not as complex as a character who creates their own hell by making bad choices out of that moral blind spot, which we talk about in the moral component. It's basically just the basically steadfast character caught in events, having to get out or figure it out and get out of the situation. That's a situation, not a story. And the reason it's problematic is that it makes them inherently passive dramatically. They could be busy, solving problems, jumping over hoops, getting out from behind crashing cars, all kinds. There could be lots of frenetic activity going on. But none of it's being generated by them creating their own problems that they have to solve, creating more problems. So stakes are rising. No, they're a leaf on the dramatic wind, being pushed by events, not causing events, and responding to their causality, moving them towards some recognition that, my gosh, I'm the problem. And then they've got to get out of the predicament that way and show that they've changed and grown. No, the problem might keep getting more serious. The challenge to them may be greater and greater, but it's all passive activity. That's all reactive, not proactive. That's the problem with these kinds of structures. And it leads to episodic writing. Episodic writing is when you've got little vignettes, or the character's up against this little opponent and they defeat them and then go on to the next opponent and defeat them. And the next, like Jason and the Argonauts, is very episodically written. Okay, the old myth. And episodic writing is problematic, especially in a movie. But in a novel too. You don't ever get enough dramatic tension developed to get fully invested as a reader, because you're jumping in and out of all these little situations and vignettes and episodes. No, you want a cohesion, a dramatic cohesion of ever increasing stakes across the middle of your story. The way you get that is through using the moral component. That is the dramatic engine of every story, and that is a problem, a moral problem that has to be that has to be solved by the end of the story. That's the dramatic engine. When the character doesn't have that, all they have is the action line to push against. Again, not bad and wrong. Lots of people write that kind of story. Speed is a good example of that kind of a story. Towering Inferno. All these disaster movies, those are all very much the basically good person caught in the no-win scenario, and they either win or lose, right? So that's the problem. Passive protagonists, episodic writing, and there's no substance outside of how entertaining it's going to be and how engaging the action is from the standpoint of the writing. You got to do all that anyway in a story with a moral component. But you've got the added complexity of developing the character as a moral being who's on that journey of change, showing how it's acting out, showing how it resolves, and all those points in between. All kinds of dimensionality added, all kinds of character complexity added that isn't in the story when they're just a basically good person overwhelmed by the story situation. That's a situation, not a story, in my opinion. Okay. Is The Godfather an example of a positive character who gets caught up, blah, blah, blah? No. I firmly believe at this point that most of the folks who say Michael Corleone is a character who's basically a good guy fallen from grace, and that's the tragedy of the story, are just flat out wrong about that. Michael Corleone is a monster. From beginning to end, he's a monster. That's why The Godfather is a horror movie. Because at the end of it, when he turns into the devil himself, he doesn't realize it. He thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's a nice family man, just taking care of the family. And he's a beast. His moral problem is that he was taught he didn't fit. He didn't belong in the family. He wasn't strong enough. That was the message the Godfather gave him when he basically banished Michael out of the family business. Now, the agenda, of course, was that when Michael went to college and graduated and all that, he would get elected senator, and then the Corleone family would have a senator who was not tainted by the family business. Big advantage for the business, right? So Michael's being set up and groomed for a big job in the family, but he doesn't realize that. So he goes to battle and he becomes a war hero. So we know he's capable of killing. Comes back, goes to the wedding. The whole thing's set up to show just how separate he is. He's wearing a uniform, not regular clothes. I don't even know if he's still in the military or not. He's sitting alone at a table with Kay, who's all engaged and looking at all the crazy people running around. And Michael's sitting there bored. Yeah, I know all these people. Yeah, that's Luca Brasi. He's pretty scary. But he's bored. He's not part of the group. Right from the get-go, we see what his problem is. It's brilliant writing on the part of Coppola. It's not in the books that way too much. The book's really kind of bad, but Coppola's rewriting of the script, whoa, boy, what a great job he did. He's not a basically good guy, because he then goes on to make this horrible choice because of his desire to get back into the family to protect the Godfather. We see the first scene where he's standing out in front with the guy waiting for the assassins to come to the hospital. And the guy's, got a gun and he's pretending like he's, standing there getting ready to shoot somebody with his gun, and he's shaking like a leaf. Michael leans over and holds his hand, right? He's got a lighter in his hand or something, and he lights a cigarette or something. The guy's shaking like a leaf. Michael's hand is stone cold, stable. And he looks down and sees it. He's not scared at all. He goes, he kind of takes a note, says, that's pretty cool, right? So we see immediately, this guy's got nerves of steel. He's capable of who knows what. And then later on down the line, he volunteers to murder a guy. Why? To get back into the family graces. That's why he does it. And he accomplishes his goal. And then from that point forward, it's all about consolidating what he's got and the degree to which he will go to make sure he never gets pushed out again. And that's why we see this guy is broken from day one. He just didn't see it. We didn't see it, but he was. He was not a guy in any form of grace at the beginning of that movie. He was a monster waiting to be born. And he was. So I would challenge that as an example of this. There are lots of examples, but you will see all of them in the end are shallower than stories dramatically that do have that classic negative to positive growth arc. Okay. Doesn't mean they're not fun. Doesn't mean they're not entertaining, but they're not as dramatically engaging or complex. Okay. So that's the reason why I think this is not the most challenging thing that you can write as a writer. It all depends on what your goal is. If you just want to write a fun, fast ride, entertain people, fine, you can do this. Basically, a good person caught in the no-win scenario, write a situation, not a problem. Have fun, go for it. But if you want to say something about the human condition, you've got to have a moral component. You've got to have that level of complexity. Okay? So I hope this answered your question. I hope it's helpful to others who listen to this. I wish I could have typed it in as a post, but obviously this is way too complicated. So leave your comments and let me know what you think, and we'll keep the conversation going.